Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce to you to the first video ever filmed by the UFC Podcast. It might be the official podcast of the UFC. I want to take a minute to thank Dana White, Sean Shelby, Hunter Campbell, and the rest of the UFC brass on helping me start this endeavor as the official podcast of the UFC. Maybe. Naturally, I can see how many viewers might see this and will think, who is this kid sitting on a couch, not even in a studio, might be in a basement, saying that he has the rights to the UFC podcast? And it's a crazy question to ask. I would ask it myself if I was sitting in your shoes. And the only natural answer is, I'm Dana White's long-lost son. I was born in Boston in 1999, and I haven't seen Dana since. Now, I think I left enough of a pause there that you can just cut that, send that out to the world. MMA media will love to hear that, Dana has an illegitimate son. But if you just continue watching to this part, I'll say it's a complete, just messing around. That's not true. I was born in Montana. I know my parents. But, it's kind of fun to think, right? How funny would it be if somebody actually clips that, sends it out, that goes viral, when 10 seconds later they continue on to completely discredit and disprove what they just said? Wouldn't put it past me, especially if it's just AI making all these cuts now. But yeah, who is this kid sitting on a couch, and why should I listen to you? And, the best possible answer is you probably shouldn't. And, this might screw me over, a little bit in the long run, but I have a concept of where I want this show to go. And I don't want to just reveal that to you, because I honestly think that it's such a good concept that if anybody were to see it, that is somehow involved or in the circle of influence that the UFC has, be it media, journalism, ex-MMA fighters, current MMA fighters on the roster, I think they would either take it for themselves, or ESPN and the UFC would give it to somebody that, they can have not influence over, because I'm not going to come out here and say stuff that the UFC wouldn't want me to say. I'm not trying to take down the UFC. I'd love to work with them in moving forward with this, but it would just make a lot more sense for the UFC podcast to be hosted by Chael Sonnen in DC, right? Or at the very least, John Anik and Brett Okamoto, people that clearly have already put their dues in, put their work in, and have established careers in that sector. That being said, I've always had a love for sport, and especially the UFC and MMA. MMA is the greatest sport in the world, and the UFC is the greatest organization to promote the greatest sport in the world. And I've always known that I'm not going to be a traditional member of that community. I'm not going to be a fighter. I'm definitely not going to be a journalist. Media doesn't traditionally interest me in the way that it's been represented in MMA in the past, but I think that with this, I might be able to, form a new path for media, and this might be a semi-unique concept. Again, I'm going to be intentionally vague here, because I don't want this to just get out and just stolen, because would be so much easier for somebody other than me to make these videos, make this show. That being said, I think that there's an incredible amount of value that can be garnered from me making these videos, and you literally being with me from day one, from the absolute start, from having nothing, from being a nobody, to becoming successful or failing, which is probably the most, likely answer or outcome, I should say. But I think that there are a lot of videos out there of successful people trying to teach you how to become successful. And although there's tons of great information in those videos, and you can't just discount them for saying what they did, I think it might be more advantageous for the layman to literally follow along from inception to success. And not only would it, provide value to you, but it would allow you to feel like a true part of the community because you were there from day one. So that being said, what I can share with you is it's obvious that this podcast would never work with me blabbering at a camera, doing exactly what I'm doing. This video is going to be the least viewed video, I hope, on all of my channels. A large reason why I'm sitting here making it right now is because I ran out of time. I've been trying to figure out a way, honestly, since January, of how I can bring this concept to life. I think that if you look at the UFC, there are definitely certain parts in the company's history that you can point to as growth, as instances of growth. And I think that there quite literally could be a huge boom following UFC 300 that isn't necessarily caused by UFC 300, but is correlated in timeline. Now, if we look in the past, you can point to, obviously nobody was watching UFC before UFC 1 in 1993, so that's a boost. Free television provided another large boost. The Ultimate Fighter in 2005, arguably the biggest of all time, maybe. 2016, being acquired by ESPN, having ESPN, the worldwide leader in sports, behind you, not only with finances, but just with media coverage, just pushing videos out there. Inexplicable what that did for the UFC and, for MMA in general. And then I think you can point to, 2020 and the UFC refusing to shut down during COVID as maybe the most recent push for growth. Now, I could be totally wrong, and UFC 300 might not be a catalyst for growth, but even if it's not, I think that, what good of time is there to start than a flagship UFC event? So we're here. It's going to be UFC 300 in 7 days time. I really don't think that I'm going to be able to push and piggyback off of as much of the promotion as I thought there would be, or I won't be able to push off as much as I thought that I could. But regardless, we ran out of time, so this is the video that we're doing today. This is the start. I won't say it's episode 1 of the podcast because this is, really nothing to do with how the podcast is going to be laid out. But this is the first video that, my channel is going to be pushing out to you guys. The first possibly viewed video. And with that said, we're going to start talking about maybe the first podcast here, or what could become of the first podcast. And I think the most important part for you to know is, ideally, the podcast will not be me. I will be involved. You could say that I'm the host of the podcast, but it's not my story that I'm trying to tell. I'd feel flattered if you want to know my story, but, I'm just a dude. There's nothing special about me. We all have our stories. We all have things that we've done, accomplished, went through, etc. But I really want to focus on the UFC. And so without further ado, I'm going to list some names here. I'm going to start hard, and it's going to get easier on the names that I list. I will say that they're all from they are all from the UFC, and they are all individuals with whom I would be very pleased to be able to speak with. I won't go as far as to say that they're heroes of mine, but they are very influential people into the sport of MMA. They're very influential people into the UFC. And the UFC is something that, I love, that I spend a large part of my life enjoying, investing into. It's created some great memories with me and my family and my friends. And, it's just an integral part of my life. And I think that I'm not the only one. So, to begin with, we're gonna look at some names. Again, these are people that I would love to host on the first episode of the podcast. Given that I'm a nobody, given that this has no following, given that this has no views, it would be outrageous for me to think that I could get them to come out to me. It would probably be equally as outrageous to think that they would let some stranger come out to them. I will just say, I am willing to. If you're in anywhere in the United States, I can't promise Brazil I would go to, but if you're in the United States, even Hawaii or Alaska, I'll find a way to get there. So we can do this video. Realistically, it's going to end up being on FaceTime or Zoom, which, as grateful as I would be for, contact through one of those mediums, I really think that, podcasts, it's important to be in person. There's something that the screen just eliminates. That really, it's just personality, right? It's just hard to get anybody's personality to come through in a video call. So, without further ado, Teila Tuli, Zane Frazier, Art Jimerson, Jason DeLucia, Trent Jenkins, Gerard Gordeau, Ken Shamrock, or Hoist Gracie. I would love to have you on episode 1 of the UFC Podcast, which might be the official podcast of the UFC. Now, those names that I just listed, if you're a true MMA fan, true fan of the UFC, it'll be blatantly obvious what those fighters, have to do with each other. But there's also 2 names that I couldn't have on my podcast that are associated with the other names, and I would feel remiss if I didn't mention them. Kevin Rozier and Patrick Smith are both no longer with us, and I just wanted to take a minute and just mention their names as well. UFC's been around for a long time, and we've lost some previous competitors. I hope that they're, hope and wish their families the best, and that they're, doing all right without their loved ones. Back to a more, I should say, back to a less somber note. The other individuals that I mentioned, it'd definitely be the hardest to get a Hoist Gracie, a Ken Shamrock, an Art Jimerson, somebody that has an established name. But some of these guys, they're probably just, your neighbor next door, and you don't even realize that they're there. You don't realize that they were some early UFC competitors. And so I think there might be a chance that we can, as a community, get one of these individuals to see this to see these videos that I'm going to be putting out and get them in contact with me. One question mark that I have for Gerard Gordeau, he's a Dutch kickboxer. Is he in America? Is he in Holland? What level of English does he speak? But other than that, everybody else is American, other than Royce. If Royce is in Brazil, I'm not going to Brazil. I'm sorry, I can't get that. Can't get that done. Episode 1. I will say Royce would be an absolute dream of mine, so that might just come later. But the other individuals, American, they should live somewhere in the United States, and we should be able to get this done. It's a crazy concept to just have no following, to have no followers, to have no show, to have nothing, and say that you're going to start one. And so this is me starting one. And those are some names of who I'd like to be on the show. I think that not only would I absolutely be astonished to be able to speak with them, and I would love, personally to be able to have that experience, I think we're going to find some very interesting things to talk about and to show you. And I think we're going to begin to build a community that is lasting, that's worthwhile, that, kind of gives you a virtual friend group, at least a group of people that have similar interests. And, I can just say from my experience, be it with coworkers or, family members, extended family members, friends, acquaintances, people in a bar, UFC and MMA is one thing that I've just never found any bad apples. Like, everybody that seems to enjoy this sport at really any level seem to be people that I get along with very well. They seem to, share some similar values, some similar experiences, and I really want to give those people a little more than some of the other content and communities around, MMA and UFC have been providing. I think that the most important thing about having a show, about having viewers, is the viewers. And I am going to be very intentional about having my viewers be part of my show. There is going to be tangible value, tangible causal effects of being a fan of the show, of following along, of being involved, of being part of this community. This is not just some guy sitting and speaking on a couch. We're going to grow this to be much more than that. And you're going to be along for the whole entire ride. So if anybody, mom, dad, like if anybody has actually even watched this far, I commend you for sitting through an absolutely boring video. Dana White, I love you. Rock on. And that's going to be episode 1. The first ever video filmed by the UFC Podcast, which might be the official podcast of the UFC. Thanks again for the time. I appreciate it more than you know. So, we're signing off, and big things to come. As Michael Chandler says, see you at the top.